So, welcome to this episode of the Immersive Theatre of Learning. The Immersive Theatre of Learning was originally a book that I published about a year ago. And I've been running this series for about a year. Um, and I feel that this episode is kind of getting us to the essence of what the book was about. So, getting inspiration from immersive theater to change, revolutionize the world of learning in universities, in companies, or on an individual basis. And I'm very, very happy to have two professionals as my guests from the world of immersive theater. Francis, who's based in France, and Donnacadh, who's based in London. So welcome, both of you.
Hello, happy to be here.
And Francis, you were supposed to be on the program last month and you were under the weather. And so we're very happy to have you here today. And so where are you calling in from, Francis? Where are you based?
I'm based in the southwestern part of France, outside of the city of Po. So I am right at the foothills of the Pyrenees. So I see them in the distance. And so an hour into Spain, an hour to the coast, into the mountains, and all is good here. But I travel often to Paris for work, which is really where a lot of this happens.
Fantastic. Brilliant. Okay. Um, and Donica, you're in sunny London.
Yeah, very, very sunny. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Although it's gonna go behind the building in a minute, so I'll be less glary.
Wonderful. Okay. Excellent. Yes. Maybe you could put in this is the kind of, normally very often we have smaller groups, and so everybody gets a chance to introduce themselves, but I think it would take a little bit too much time today. So if you could just put in the chat where you're calling in from, and so that we get a little bit of a feel who is in the room. So we have Olive in Brussels, Warwickshire, okay, Mexico, Saudi Arabia, Holland, Heidelberg in Germany. That's France, right next door. Okay, India, Athens, wonderful. Really, really international audience today.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Superb. Now, I would like to kick it off with a word that probably everybody has an idea about. Um, and it's the word immersion. And so there's a little thing about immersion, of course, in my book. And so immersion is not just screens, right? So a lot of people have the idea of immersion is with a headset, it's VR, it's AR, and all that kind of thing. But actually, immersion could be physical or digital. It, some of us here in the room, they come from a language side, right? So when I was a kid, we were talking about linguistic immersion, right? So going to a country to actually be immersed with the people who speak a foreign language, and then to learn English or whatever the language was with people. Some of the people here in the room are in the intercultural field, so cultural immersion, and maybe something that covers both, and other things would be social immersion. So basically being around other people and have that kind of connection. I would also say there is cognitive immersion where you feel intellectually stimulated and connected. There is definitely sensory and emotional immersion. Um, Being active in something, in an experience, active immersion, and maybe a combination of several of these things would be uh, what we would call full immersion. How many of these boxes would you tick, Francis, in your work?
Oh, geez. Almost all minus the virtual.
Yes.
because I work predominantly, in the person-to-person interaction without a lot of the tech. But all the other ones, especially in linguistic, because we're bilingual, so we can work fully in one language or the other. But we need it for full immersion. We'll get asked, okay, we want it to be in English, or it needs to be in French. So I would say, yeah, almost all mine is virtual.
Okay, fantastic. We'll hear a little bit more about your work in a minute. How about you, Donnacadh? How many of these boxes do you tick?
Um, I don't know actually. I mean, I'm not sure. To some extent, all kinds of to things to some extent. Yeah, maybe not linguistic. Not often virtual. Um, I'm fairly monolinguistic, sadly, to my shame. But yeah, I mean, certainly, I would definitely focus in on things like emotional, cultural, social, cognitive, um, and physical and sensory. Probably they would be the ones I would, yeah, connect most with.
Yeah, wonderful. Um, right. So the definition I use in my book is from Paul Zak. Paul Zak calls himself a neuroeconomist. Immersion is a neurological state in which one is attentive to an experience and it resonates emotionally. So looking at immersion like this is actually a very broad term. And it also reminds me of flow, uh, the concept by Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi, where it's a flow channel. And especially when we talk about learning, this flow channel is actually when the challenge and the set of skills you need is more or less in a balance, right? And it's a channel, so it goes up because you develop more and more skills. And if you're understimulated, you're basically bored. And if you're overstimulated, you enter the panic zone. So it's about finding that magic sweet spot in the middle. And I would like to send people off into a first breakout. So to introduce yourselves to one another and to think about which of these forms of immersion you use in your work. So if you engage people emotionally, you tick at least one of these boxes. And so to what extent is your work immersive? Okay, so we open the breakout rooms for probably about 6, 7 minutes, and then we come back to hear more about Francis and Donnacadh's work. Okay, welcome back. So, hope you made some nice connections. We're going to go into breakout rooms a little later on for a challenge where you actually need to put a little bit of the stuff you learned today at work with people you may or may not know. We have a very mixed group here, which makes it really exciting and interesting. But first of all, I would like to hear from Francis. Yeah, Ollie, you raised your hand.
Yes. Sorry, I hear some noise, so shut off. Okay, so it was interesting, share. I'm not going to spend too much time, but I was thinking about this importance of preparation, and the best metaphor is like when you are going to go to the abyss, whatever the distance, the profoundness of the ocean you are going to be, you have to be prepared to have in advance the equipment necessary. That's really important about preparation because then you are struggling in the process. And then, of course, after the immersion, when you go back to reality, like the metaphor of the abyss is really also important because you cannot go up right there like no, you need because else your lungs will not support it. So you have to what I call palier steps and gently become to reality because else it will be harsh. So that's my share. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you, Ollie. Thank you. Right, let's come to you, Francis. So tell us a little bit about your work. Tell us a little bit about Eat the Cake, and maybe you have some kind of a definition of what immersive theater is compared to theater, and maybe also what your personal take on it is.
Absolutely. Well, so yes, I'm Frances. So I am founder and creative director of Eat the Cake Studio. So we're an immersive entertainment studio in France. So Frances in France, that's how you'll find me. And so so we specialize as immersive entertainment all across the board. So we do events, we do shows, and we also do attractions. We design concepts for indoor attractions. Yummy name, indeed. There's a real reason behind Eat the Cake, as a matter of fact, also, but it does give off ideas of cake. Thanks, Ollie. And so I created the company. So my history is I come from arts and entertainment. So I have over 30 years of experience in first starting performing arts, on stage, behind the scenes, in front of a camera, behind the camera, all the, story building, world building, character designing. I'm a screenwriter. I did work in documentaries, Eliza, filmmaking, cabaret. I ran a cabaret for 10 years. And then I went into being a narrative designer at a video game company. So long story short, I have a very large array of what is entertainment that I fold into when I create immersive experiences. Why immersive theater? Because my base really is the theater. Fun fact, I wanted to be a Broadway star when I was a little kid. That did not happen, but I'm working my way there with my immersive production. So, just watch out for that. And so the theater for me was always a place where we could shine and where we could, in the darkness, get lost in the story and project ourselves onto whatever was happening in front of us on the stage. One of my biggest moments was seeing Eponine cry in the hands of Marius when she was dying at the, sorry, spoiler alert, Les Mis. And that really was one of those things that just really stuck with me. And so when it came time for me to open the company, I had also been a tour guide, a Paris history tour guide in France. When you don't speak French, you find the work you can do in English. And I was a Paris history tour guide. And often people would say, oh, it'd be so great to know what it was like back then, to feel what it was like back then. And so the first idea was, well, then I'm going to bridge the gap. And I'm going to bridge the gap between French history and the travelers, the Anglophones especially, that are coming to France so they can live history. Because we're going to access the information, we're going to access the knowledge, the teachings differently if we can be part of it. And so that's how Eat the Cake blossomed. And we created what is now our signature universe, which is Versailles, anything around Versailles, which Eliza also realized that she did experience my welcome experience at my entry immersive theater piece at the WXO Summit, which was really wonderful. And so we wanted to bring to life Marie Antoinette for everybody to understand and be in the shoes of this misunderstood young girl. And that's what launched it all. So despite everything we do, whether it's events or we're coming to an event or we're building a show, we put performers at the heart of everything we do. And we give a role to the participant in everything we do, whether that role be small, almost role-less, but a heightened version of themselves, or they're full-blown in costume playing a character and everything in between. That's what we do when we create immersive theater. I see immersive theater, of course, immersive for me is you put the participant at the heart of everything you do. Multisensory, engaging to the participants with a level of emotional connection, and allowing a space for the participants to also be vulnerable and allow themselves to shine and find themselves in the experience. Now, where we differ from somebody like Punch Drunk with Sleep No More, at least their early work, which was masked, was that we want the participant to blend with everyone. We want to give them an active role based on their comfort levels, based on the levers they choose to interact. So we want them to be participants. We want them to really be in the world. So we really try not to separate. We break that fourth wall completely, and we really try to avoid adding anything that's going to put a fourth wall, like something that will differentiate completely. So often for our immersive universes, when we have the budget, we dress everybody up fully. And so there's no distinction between who is actually part of the court and who is playing part of the court. And of course, we do design everything so that it's very clear. In most cases, who will, at the end of the day, you will realize who the performers are. But the performers are either going to be facilitators, actor facilitators, animators. It depends on the role. It depends on the project we're working. But regardless, for me, the lifeblood of what immersive theater is, what I do, is all human-based. I design human-to-human experiences, and for me, I need the humans to be there for me, to be part of that. And so that is, for me, how I see and what we see at Eat the Cake Studio as what is immersive theater. The opportunity to step into your favorite movie, into your favorite world, and be an active participant in it, and walk away, ideally slightly transformed or an elevated version of yourself at the end.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah.
Thank you. Now, for those of you who have never been to an immersive theater performance, anybody raise your hand who has not been to? Okay, thank you. So if I understand correctly, you come to a show, to a performance, to an evening, to an event, as a participant, but you cannot be passive. You cannot sit back and watch. You have to play a role, or at least interact with the actors. So to what extent is this scripted, and how much of it is improvisation?
So, excellent question. First, I'll preface with the fact that, in general, for immersive, we're going to design for the main three types. There's the three types of, participants, your skimmers, swimmers, and divers, or depending on where you are, it's front seat, back seat, and driver. Not everybody's going to want to come in with a full level of engagement. Sometimes in some experiences, and I can share my screen and show you one, sometimes we know that the partner's being kind of dragged by the person who really loves it and is dragging the partner with them. And, we can gauge more or less how interactive or engaged they want to be. But inevitably, we always at least give a heightened sense of self. And that, again, in one of the examples I'll show how we did that specifically for that case. And so then the other response is, it really depends on what we're designing. We design around what I call musicality. We're going to choreograph beats. We're going to choreograph main scenes. We're going to I like to start with a main opening and a main closing. So everybody's there to get those elements of the story. And then we're going to design the beats in between and allow the participants to fill it in. And that also means we're going to rely quite heavily on our performers to be great improvisers. So not every actor is also going to be great in immersive theater. A lot of it is understanding, engaging the participant in front of you, understanding a bit more human interaction, can gauge what's landing, what's not, who wants to interact and who doesn't, and then working with that. Nothing worse than forcing anyone to do anything. We really, that's not at all what we do. So if we see you come in and you're ready to play, we're going to most likely go towards you more than the person who's kind of shy in the corner. We'll acknowledge them, but we're going to get those signs clear that maybe they don't want to engage with us. Mm-hmm. So it really depends. Some shows can be heavily scripted and leave light room. It depends on how much engagement and interaction you want your audience to have. Again, we design beats and then we fill in with improv, and that way it just feels more like it's coming to life in that moment.
I love the music analogy there. Now, I suppose an actor in a classic theater play would say, okay, we had a good night tonight because we performed well. What is your idea of a good night?
Excellent question. Because there's so many variables now when you introduce the participants into the mix. A good night for me already is when all my actors are still there, because I did have one where the actress had an asthma attack right when we launched the experience, and I had to jump in and play her part, which was fine because I am also a performer. However, I'd never performed in French, and I'd never performed that character in French. So already a good night is when all my actors are safe and there. Separately, and besides that, it's when when we hit our beats. So we're going to, let's already go with what, is going to be kind of empirical. When we hit our beats on the right time, we're in time, and we can guide the audience into what feels like a really great, the energy is working, everyone's getting it, we're moving forward, we're getting good feedback, and we're moving everything along as we should. And then the less empirical, which is more intuitive, it just feels right. Again, there's even in proscenium theater, you're going to get on stage, and sometimes those audiences are great, and they're going to give back, and sometimes they're not. I mean, as a burlesque performer, as a cabaret performer, I've been on stages where you can hear a pin drop, which when it comes to burlesque is really challenging because a lot of it is call and response. So it's going to be similar. Sometimes you're going to get participants that are going to be ready to go and you're going to play with them, and sometimes not. And so for me, it's when it all kind of just gels together. It feels good. We've accomplished everything. We've hit our timing. We've said the main pieces, and everybody's left feeling as we had intended, with whatever the output we wanted them to feel, that they leave like that.
Now, personally, as I come from the field of learning and slowly moving towards the world of immersive theater, when you work with learners, sometimes you have very reluctant participants, right? So you have people who don't necessarily want to be there. A bit like what you mentioned earlier on. So they were pushed into this, not necessarily by their partners, but maybe by their managers or by school or whatever it is, by their parents. But then sometimes I feel very proud when I actually manage to win them over, to engage them anyway. Do you have moments like this where you have an audience that is not naturally drawn towards it, that is a bit reluctant at first, but then at the end of the evening, you think, oh, that was a good one. It was hard work, but we're happy that we ended like that.
Yes. I can say in general, the French audiences tend to come in like that. So this is where, understanding that cultural part, the cultural immersion, it's designing for French audiences as an expat, coming with a more American mentality. It's a little bit different, and that took a while to figure out, that they're very different audiences with very different elements that they like, and how they like to be approached, and what they want to happen. And so the vast majority of our French audiences come in are more reserved, and it takes a little more of our facilitation to engage them. But because we know that, we design for that facilitation. And so in one of my experiences, it's the Cabinet of Curiosities. In this one, we would transform empty apartments, or not empty. They had furniture and everything, but these were apartments that were used for rentals. So we had a partnership with a boutique rental agency, and whenever an apartment was available, she'd let us know. And once a month, we'd be able to go in and transform the apartment in the space of 24 hours. It would be transformed into a cabinet of curiosities. And so what we would do is we'd have a salon part, and we'd do like a Parisian salon. You'd have some bubbles, we called champagne. It was Prosecco. And then we had some facilitating activities, like certain questions, all within the universe and within the theme, to help warm up everybody. Now, these were in small groups, maximum 18 people per session, because the apartments are not very big. And then we had a device to separate people into 3 small groups. And then they would go by small groups into 3 closed doors. And behind 3 closed doors were 3 completely different universes. Almost all of them were history-based and/or famous characters that are maybe not true, that are fictional, but people know very well. And so in small groups, you do 20 minutes, 20 minutes, 20 minutes, and then you'd come back out. We'd open all the cabinet doors, and then you could flow freely for another 30 minutes. All of this while drinking bubbles. We'd pour every time you came in and out of a room. And also each room had a whole multi-sensory kind of experience that it also included food of that era or food of that region. And the way we got it, because it was in an apartment, it felt really particular. It was hard for people to get this was an immersive theater. It felt like it was my house. I was the main host, Madame X, and I'd invite people in, but it was almost as if it were my home. So we had to set it up so that people understood, set up what we call the magic circle. So people understood that they were stepping into a production, but the production was there in a home. And we would even start outside. We would start way before, but when they arrived outside, Mademoiselle Y would already be there with stickers. And based on seeing you, she'd write an attribute, like an adjective, like seduction or joy or love, not always positive, and that would be you. So you would come in as you, but you would be coming in as you as love or seduction. And so that allowed people to also get out of their way, allowed to step into a little bit of a role and then play. And so already that started warming up people because it was something to talk about. And then the games in the beginning in the salon. And then everybody would do the experience. So what we noticed was that by the time everybody came out, people actually really enjoyed so much being in their small groups. They stayed in their small groups, despite the fact they came with somebody else. And there was a lot of exchanging of phone numbers and like, let's meet up again. So much so that a year later, we did a special night for anybody that had come, and we called it the Social Club, the Cabinet of Curiosities Social Club. And it was the same principle, curiosities in every nook and cranny, but it was everybody who had already come to one of our experiences so they could also connect and have a good time together. So long-winded to get to the fact is that we designed for that, and we'll have things kind of either on the table, on surface, ready to go, or in our back pocket to help facilitate when we see that there's a bit of resistance. Do we win everybody over? Maybe not. But we do see a lot of the faces start to smile at the end after they've done everything. So at that point, we've known even the crunchiest of the French spirits were able to get past it like a creme brulee into their soft, warm hearts.
Wonderful. Now, immediately I have ideas now as a learning experience designer, because very often we end up in these boring training rooms or classrooms and so on. So basically without any soul, very functional. How wonderful would it be to actually rent an apartment and stage a learning experience there, and prepare the rooms, and decorate it in a way that is actually in the idea of the learning experience. Now, you mentioned earlier on, Francis, that sometimes, or more often than not, people come out of the experience transformed in a way. So what is the element of learning or transformation, which is not necessarily the same thing, in your experiences or in immersive theater in general?
Excellent question. In general, there's the possibility to learn. To put it plainly, it's a possibility to learn once you've gotten yourself out of the way. A lot of us, we come with our biases. And when we can, or bias, everybody comes to an experience, whatever it is in life, with everything they already are. And this goes same with theater. It's going to resonate with some people because for me in my life and everything I've lived, this is the meaning that I'm projecting onto what I'm seeing. And it's going to be the same with immersive. However, with immersive, we take that, we see that, we understand that, and we design to be able to then facilitate conversations and or exchange based on what needs to get accomplished. What you would like for the end to be. So a lot of it really is designed on purpose. At least, again, the main beats, to be able to help people go through an experience that will allow them to see differently, step into someone else's shoes, or see differently, or meet people maybe they wouldn't have, or access information differently. And, so again, when we're like in a classroom situation or in a really traditional kind of academic exchange, then I'm the learner and you're the teacher. And so that exchange doesn't really shift much. It doesn't allow for me to actually maybe go and step into being the teacher and then seeing from a different perspective and then saying, oh, maybe for the learner to to know they need X information. So then I'm going to take that back. Example, we worked 2 years ago with what was Pôle emploi, now it's France Travail, which is the unemployment agency in France. And they had a program which was employment through the arts. And we did 3 sessions, and they were each time 2 weeks long, that ended with a final show. So we use immersive theater arts to help people become employable again. Mm-hmm. And each session we had somewhere between 15 and 20 people. We did 3 of these in the year. And so some of it, so the first half of the class would be the skills and the soft skills you learn through theater work. Mm-hmm. And then the second half would be what is immersive and learning immersive design. And at the end, we had to end with, we ended with an immersive theatrical production. And what we did, because this was work, and we wanted them to understand work and be employable, is we would build the, roughly translated, the crazy job fair. And they were the employers, and they had the crazy companies. And they could be anything. It could be unicorn trainers, which we had. It could be any company. And then we opened the doors for people to come in and go through the job fair and be interviewed by the companies, by the people that were taking the program. So not only was it really fun, and it really gave them a lot of the different skills that theater work and immersive work can in life, but the information we received from the employment agency was 50% of the people that went through their program were either employed or in training right after our program. So by the fact that they were able to see the other side and ask all the questions and not have the fear around what is it like, what does it land, how am I going to do, what are they going to ask me, but really release all that, have fun with it, and then be the employer, they learned then how to elevate themselves or best to be their best selves as a person seeking employment.
Mm-hmm. Right. Fantastic. Thank you very much. I could listen to you for hours, but let's come to Donnacadh in a minute. But before that, I'd like to open it up for questions. Anybody who would like to know more about Eat the Cake, about some of the projects Francis mentioned, or any thoughts or questions you would like to share?
It sounds like a very nice project, Francis. Congratulations.
Thank you, Rick. It's nice to see you.
Nice to see you again.
And thank you very much. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah.
And work.
I'll be checking more about it. Thank you.
Yeah. Sorry. Oli asks, is it face-to-face or does the cake can be tasted online? I think it's you mainly work in person, right?
I mainly work in person. We did a lot. We did immersive theater online through COVID.
Yeah.
We did quite a few Zoom experiences with the Queen and her court. You could actually meet the Queen and her court online, but now we do in person.
Wonderful.
I do have a question. So when you design the roles for the experience or for the immersive theater, basically, like to use them in the theater, what would be some of the things that you keep in mind about the audiences?
So is your question, do we design the roles for the participants that are going to come?
Yes. So if you have the final outcome in mind, and then you're designing the roles, what helps you facilitate that, like to design the roles in a way that would serve the outcome the most?
So a couple distinctions. Well, one will be that we don't do full character sheets for the participants. I mean, sometimes our shows have 200 people in them. So we wouldn't be able to design character sheets for that many people. And when those character sheets are designed, then that kind of starts stepping into this crossover between immersive theater and LARPing, which is live action role play. And in LARP, they do design a lot of the sheets for their participants. Now, they're not necessarily the same. Everybody's coming in. They can be 150 to 200 people in a LARP as well. But everybody's coming in as a full active participant in one way or another. So we are going to do it where it's, we're going to design often either we'll let them choose and we'll have a list they can choose from, like the type of character, or we're going to give out little quests And again, this will to give an example. Let Them Eat Cake, the show, which was the show that we first started with Marie Antoinette. We had at that point it was going to be a small audience of 60 people coming in per session, and in that one everybody was going to get ahead of time emailed a character kind of just based on who we needed to accomplish certain functions in the story, and a slight mission, not too much, because again you don't want to impose on people that don't necessarily want to do too much. So you just want to give enough to be like they have something to do while they're there. Some people just need, a hook to hang their hat on, like something to do while they're there so they're not just staring at everybody. So maybe the mission was try to find somebody to marry your daughter. That was one of the missions. And that could be just talking to someone at the champagne line and being like, hey, do you want to marry my daughter? So, it didn't require much. So it really depends. We try not to impose too much, and we always think of the different levels of engagement, and then we'll build around that.
Yes.
That's great. Thank you.
Elsie has.
Yeah, sorry. Can I ask my question?
Sure, please go ahead.
So, Francis, thank you so much for sharing that, and your passion and enthusiasm. It's got me all excited. And also the different areas that you apply what you do, especially the last project with the employment, because it's just amplifying this whole role-playing thing, right? And I'm just curious, is there an area of objectives that you find more challenging to do the immersive experience? Because I'm a trainer, I'm a coach as well, but I'm just curious in terms of in what situations would it be difficult to use this tool, I suppose, to help the learner? Or is it something that we can apply to pretty much everything?
Thank you very much. I think for me, it's something you can apply to almost everything. Now, where we've come up and faced challenges, interestingly enough, has been when we've dealt with big brands. When we deal with big companies and there's a big brand guideline and we want to do more immersive theater elements around that, that's where we have the challenge when it comes to designing, because they're very particular with how they need to appear, so that you can very much facilitate, like hold the participant in a space that's safe. So definitely build a safe space, facilitate, be prepared for whatever comes out of it, and then debrief. And in a lot of cases, we debrief. Vast majority of our experiences, we debrief when we can.
Speaking of sensitive topics, also, I mean, for me, one of the origins of immersive theater is probably what Augusto Boal did in Brazil in the 1970s with the Theater of the Oppressed, Forum Theater, which is still around, right? So a form of theater where you play out, you act out,
Absolutely. That's a great example. The Theater of the Press is an excellent example.
Yeah.
And that was a big learning. And again, it was very much, okay, how are people going to land and how can we support them when they land? What kind of parachutes, what kind of tools can we give them throughout and after, so they can also unpack everything they just lived and be able to learn from what they went through. But some of them were really challenging.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And one of his quotes that I love is theater is not the revolution, it's the rehearsal for the revolution. And so I kind of stole that line for the subtitle of my book. Learning experiences are rehearsals for life. And I would like to hand over, thank you very much, Francis, hand over to Donnacadh, because you come from the world of theater, so you've been in the theater world for quite a few years, I think. And more recently, you have moved slowly into the field of learning as well. And so I would like to know how this crossover came about. And then also, I think you wanted to share one or two things about one of the projects you were involved in. And then also maybe later on we can chat a little bit about the situation in the UK, which where immersive theater as such, but then also immersive learning is probably a little bit further down the road than France and or some of the other countries represented here on the call. So, Donnacadh, over to you.
Yes, thanks. Hello. Yeah, I'll give a very briefly on background. 20 years of directing plays. That's the bulk of my background, really. That's my main career, or my first career, maybe, is a way of looking, is how I look at that now. I did train as an actor originally, which is most people's way in, I suppose, one way or another, to that industry. And then spent, yeah, the best part of 20 years making work, directing people's work, sometimes co-writing or adapting myself. Predominantly new writing, but also a lot of classics as well over the years, kind of 80 plus productions. So plenty in that career. And then throughout that time, I also trained people. So I trained actors and writers and directors during that time as well. Probably started doing that about 15 years ago. And I've always done that to some extent. And also when I trained as an actor, we did education work during the training as well. Actually, just that particular school, there was a lot of kind of Boal actually and influence in that training, and we did education projects throughout. So it's always been in my background. It's always been an interest of mine. So in terms of immersive theater, it's come to it more recently. I mean, I've made projects over the years which were fairly immersive when that word wasn't really the word people were using, kind of promenade stuff. And I once made a show which was a building, which was a small building. It was a peep show theater, which was a 3 meter white cube surrounded by 14 private booths, and we made shows. We made short plays about intimacy. And it was at the Edinburgh Festival for a couple of years, for example. So that was, in like 2011, 2012, 2013, before people were using the word immersive, really. But so sometimes I've made very immersive stuff, but most of my work has been on stages. But I think for me, the question of immersive or not immersive, for me, that it's part of the same question I think I've always asked, which is what's the right form for this content? What's the right way of engaging with this subject or this theme? And so when I had this idea to make these really quite intimate short plays about the most intimate aspects of relationships, one play, for example, was largely a conversation around porn between a couple, and another play was a series of short scenes where a story unfolded where you understood that where there was a wife, if you like, who was in a hotel room with a male prostitute, and in her bedroom was her husband, who had prostate cancer and was trying to find ways of being able to be sexually active on his own through mail order medications and tricks. And essentially it was a story about this sexual relationship from the perspective of these two different rooms. Anyway, but the question was, what's the right form to present these? How do I want the audience to meet these stories? What's going to help that resonate? And so we created this venue, this peep show venue, where there was this kind of where you played with this slightly illicit idea of being a voyeur and being on your own and having this private space to relate to these complex, potentially quite embarrassing subjects. Gave you some privacy in a way to kind of with these subjects. But at the same time, it wasn't, in fact, prurient. It was it was theater, it was art, it was the arts. It wasn't actually a peep show. So there was this kind of game, if you like, as an audience member, between the context you were in and yet this conversation you were invited into around quite complex topics. So for me, there's always been a question of what's the form, and so with the project I want to mention that I made earlier this year, I was actually approached by a company, a learning and development company, to make something. They wanted something immersive, so that was kind of the buzzword for them. Again, neither the learning and development company nor the insurance company who were the client quite knew what they meant by that, but it was something that they had some kind of sense of. And so with that project, that was a pretty loose brief. We want it to be immersive. We want it to be theatrical, exciting. We want people to be surprised and it be unexpected. But of course, nevertheless, for me, I still had to start with, okay, well, what is the content here? What's the content? So it's leadership training. So what are our learning outcomes? Who are these people that are coming? What are they going to be bringing with them? What do you want to achieve what does the company, the client, what do they want to achieve? What kind of change do they want to bring about? What kind of ideas do they want in the room? What do they want people bringing back to the office? It's still, fundamentally it was going to be immersive, but that's a very broad church. So, there was a long period of figuring out, well, what exactly is the content here? What needs to happen? And then I think once we figured out what needed to happen, we built an immersive experience in order to make that happen. And if something different had needed to happen, we would have built something quite different. So there's still a lot of kind of formal, a huge amount of kind of formal choices to make within this very broad area of immersive, which I think is partly the point, isn't it, Bernd, in terms of your work, is that in order for a moment of learning, let's say, to be immersive, that doesn't mean you've got to spend £100,000 on a set and have a cast of 20. You absolutely don't. For something to be immersive, it can be very small qualities that can make an experience immersive. I was chatting with Louis about the truth is that reading a story is immersive. It's just you in a book. Like that's immersive in the sense that your imagination is taking you somewhere, and it's multisensory because your senses are existing in your imagination. So, and actually that's quite an important point, because with the work we make, you're doing a kind of a dance with the imagination of the audience. And my kind of recent made up rule, the Dirty Dancing rule, which is the rule of my dance space and your dance space. And as a creator or the experience designer, it's very important to manage the dance space so you're not taking up all the space. There has to be a lot of space for the participants. And managing that space, we talk about holding space, but also negotiating space in the moment with real detail is the skill of the facilitator, but it has to be the skill of an immersive performance as well, both in terms of the fundamentals of the design and in terms of the moment-to-moment interaction, which Francis obviously has talked a lot about, and the nuance of what the actor is doing.
Great.
Yeah.
We have a question from B, I think, or a comment.
I do have a question. I just wanted to know from Donnacadh, what was the learning? What were they trying to instill in the people that the clients or whoever?
Yes. Well, why don't I show a couple of photographs while I answer that, Bernd, if I can.
Yeah, absolutely.
Share my screen. Just give me a second while I get us to the right place. Sorry, there we go. Can you see that? Picture of a bunch of people in a warehouse. So what they wanted, there's a couple of things they wanted. So obviously there's a HR department sponsored event that that's their budget. One of the things they wanted was they wanted their leaders, the people with people management responsibilities, to, when presented with a complex situation, or even not a complex situation, but with someone they're line managing, to stop asking the question, to stop calling HR and saying, "What's the rule?" and to start looking at the person and being a human being and trying to be in the problem and try and essentially, try and lead, but try to be present with the person and figure it out, be willing to enter into the conversation, to take the risk of actually entering into dialogue, and stop calling HR and saying, "What's the rule?" or this is complicated, I don't know how to deal with this, you deal with it, which so this is, if you like, on the kind of day-to-day issues of the HR department, the kind of gripes, if you like, and it was interesting kind of trying to separate the gripes from the kind of the slightly deeper instructions. So that was key. So we took kind of be more human was something we took on as a kind of a phrase in the writing and the creating of the piece. Um, and also I think the phrase brave communication came up for me as well. Actually, I think I've taken the phrase brave spaces from you, B, actually, from your talk with Bernd, which I quote often, and did on this as well. But the idea of brave communication that actually, which just acknowledges that in that moment, annoying as it might be for the HR team, in that moment, the manager is nervous. And in order to have this conversation, this open conversation with the person they're working with, requires them to be brave. And if we're going to ask them to be brave, so one of the things I suppose we tried to do was to demonstrate bravery, or incentivize bravery in the show. So, for example, the way the piece worked, this is the opening. This is kind of an opening scene where they get a briefing from the dock manager. So, of these people in the image here, about 10 of them are actors and about 30 are the participants.
Yeah.
The audience.
So it's set in the 1930s or something?
Yeah, it's set in the London docks in the late 30s.
Oh, right.
And the idea was that we would take it to pre-tech into a manual world. So not the city insurance company,
yeah,
with an office on the 34th floor of the Scalpel building. But to take it somewhere really quite different and somewhere vivid, in which which would take them out of their worlds, essentially. So there's something about that kind of initial imaginative leap of entering into a different world, and I think one of the things that achieved if you like, the kind of immersion in a space, with characters who were from a world of the 1930s and a space that was clearly existed in the 1930s, and a kind of a sound design which made it feel like an operating, working space. I think it just helped the audience to step out of their roles. It's not that we didn't ask them to step into a role, but it just helped them to step out of their roles as, John from accounts. It was much easier to just be John, who is finding this very interesting, instead of being John from accounts. And I think, yeah, so they weren't invited to take on a role in this. They were active participants, but they were allowed to be themselves. So they were active and they interacted with characters, but as themselves. There was a kind of a light touch role that they were kind of day laborers, who were coming in to help a big moment where the company needed all hands on deck in order to achieve something that could change the direction of the company the next day. Was the kind of conceit. But I'm just going to show you a few photographs. This is, again, one of the characters. This is a moment where a character is speaking to some audience. So it was very interactive, and a lot of the kind of the structure, if you like, which repeated itself 3 times in bigger and bigger ways, was that you would, and it was Forum Theatre was a big influence here. You would see an interaction between some characters. You would then get to question characters about what was going on and what the problem was and what they wanted and where, what was happening for them, and get as much information as you can. That was facilitated by a character, and then you would get to then you would go off in your little group of 5, and you would strategize in your group about. So there was a prompt given, for example. The basic version is, if the manager were to come in right now, what should she say to him in order to get what she wants? And then, of course, they would strategize. They would then advise the character on what they might do in that situation. The character would talk back. Sometimes they would agree. They might not agree. They might challenge things. And then the manager would walk in, because, of course, that was where that was always going to lead to. And the manager would come in, and then essentially the strategy that had been created by these participants, the strategy they had, the advice they'd given, would then play out in real time in front of them, and things would succeed or fail. But there was a lot of failure. I think that's important to say. Different characters wandering around. This is another example. So in this bit, this is one of the earlier scenes where that's a kind of a guide character who's introducing people to the world of the show. I'm going to stop sharing now, but anyway, some nice photographs.
I have
Yeah.
two burning questions, Donnacadh. The first one is, well, you just said we wanted to take them out of their world and also out of their ordinary day-to-day roles.
Yeah.
Um, do you find that is something that could almost be liberating in
Yeah, I think that's
learning?
vital, to be honest. Yeah, I think it's vital. I'm sure you know that it's something we'll all have felt in a learning context as well, but particularly in a kind of a corporate context, if you work in that context. When people are sitting in their role in a company, in a room, in those fixed relationships with those fixed issues and gripes, they are very limited. They're limited by that. And it's very difficult as a facilitator, of course, to work within those limitations, partly because you don't know them or understand them. And they're often very peculiar. Um, and they're incredibly limiting for their participants. So, there are all kinds of strategies that most people use to help bring a group out of that. But this was a very heightened, very expensive, if you like, also way of creating a situation in which they were moved without even noticing it or noticing it was happening to them. They were moved out of their roles into a much more imaginative and a much more mobile space where they were able to surprise themselves and each other in ways that I think that they didn't expect.
Yeah.
And also I think something else we did on this just briefly is this was a real challenge. That at one point it became apparent the client were quite keen, or the learning development company were quite keen that the things the participants did would affect the outcome. Which for anyone who's ever written a story, or made a show, it's very difficult, really, because what's how do you know what the outcome is then? How do you prepare the outcome if they're going to affect the outcome? So it's not something I'd done before, and actually we did do it on this, and there was essentially an infinite number of potential outcomes. And the final act where the whole thing was kind of brought together and we found out, how we'd done, if you like, back in that large space. There was lots of smaller spaces which you haven't seen, didn't necessarily see in the photographs. But when we came back to that large space, back to the doc manager, and we found out how it went, depending on what show you were in and how it went, the kind of metaphor was organizational health. So sometimes you would find out that one or more of the workers had walked away or been fired or been asked to leave or said I need to go. So the audience were listening and questioning and strategizing and advising, and sometimes the results of that advice was the characters managed to find a way through these difficult conversations and find some kind of way forward. Nobody ever had a big hug and a kiss and did big heart emojis or anything, but they found a way to keep going into tomorrow, build trust, build respect between peers or up and down the chain management situations. They found a way forward, or they didn't find a way forward, or they hit a really hard impasse. And sometimes you would find out in Act 5 that some characters weren't coming back, and that was going to affect what happened and the success of this company tomorrow, which of course is a very simple metaphor for any company, the success of any company, its organizational health, the kind of happiness and willingness to engage of its employees is going to have a huge impact on how it's going to succeed tomorrow and beyond. So we did actually manage to create an ending which was different every time, which wasn't easy, but I'm delighted that they asked for that, and I'm delighted that I was fool enough to say, okay, it can probably be done, even though I don't know. I'm glad we kind of figured it out, because it was very, it was in the end, it wasn't impossible. We found a way of doing it, and the actors were very brave and very skilled, and which is also one of the benefits that in London there is a very established immersive scene. So I was able to draw from actors who had done, many month runs of immersive shows like The Great Gatsby or Peaky Blinders and Doctor Who, and people with real experience of this type of stuff and real experience of working with live audiences and improvising on the spot and navigating your way around a tricky moment.
Yeah. Wonderful. Now we have some comments and questions in the chat. We come to them in a minute, but when you mentioned, yeah, in a normal corporate setting, basically we fight for attention, right? So because basically people come to a training room and you fight for their attention basically constantly because they may get an email, they may get a message, they have to be with one eye on the screen. And if you take them into a different world, it's less likely to happen, right? So they can still
Yeah.
check their phones, I suppose, but yeah.
Yeah,
So
well, they were openly invited not to do that. I mean, by one of the, the L&D. So there was a one, forgot to mention, there was a 1 hour facilitated debrief after that,
yes,
where there was three facilitators, of which I was one. I was one of the three who did. So we had 10 people each, and we did a 1 hour debrief, which we can touch on as well. But that was obviously incredibly important, vital part of the puzzle, from a learning context.
yeah.
Um,
I think that's also Lena's question. So it is, of course, great to have an experience like this, but it only becomes a learning experience once you actually can
yeah,
also make the connection to your normal world, right? It's
yeah,
like in the hero's journey, you go into the unknown and then you come back as
yeah.
a hero. So how are you going to do this in your office, right?
Mm.
Playing your normal role. So do you have any, well, you did 1 hour of debrief, but do you have any information whether this had an impact on their daily lives?
Well, that's kind of work in progress. I mean, I think I'm going to see some of the client. I'm going to see quite a lot of them in about a week's time. I've been invited to one of their kind of big kind of their events, so I'm going to see quite a few of them. But I mean, all I can say at this point is from what I've seen, very happy clients. I think the kind of the internal dialogue around it was very, very positive. But I haven't seen. I'm hoping they're a big company, big department. I'm hoping they will produce something at some point a bit more statisticky, which I can see and look at, just because it's useful to have that stuff. But in very positive in general. Just on the kind of the hero's journey bit, I think one of the things that was quite important here was actually there was a lot of failure in this show. It was failure heavy. In terms of the interactions, these kind of moments of like question the character, strategize, advise, there was three of those as the show went on. The first one was relatively straightforward, and then they got more complicated. The final one was really quite complicated, very emotional problem, a very volatile moment. So really hard to actually navigate for the participants. But obviously, again, we're trying to build up a certain amount of training, if you like, so that they then gave them the hardest thing to do, which was also quite dramatic because there was a twist element to that in terms of the narrative structure. So it was beginning to feel like maybe they were coming to the end of experience. Then something happened in which kind of something very unexpected happened. Essentially, the guide character, who had been this really nice character they'd been with the whole time, who could clap their hands and stop characters and freeze them and explain how the thing worked. So these characters from the 1930s, but who could also talk to you and they knew who you were. That what happened was in this big turning point that character suddenly had a thing happen. The simple example, so there was three of these journeys, but in one of them they had some time off booked in the morning to take their kid to a doctor's appointment, and it had been signed off weeks ago. And suddenly in that moment they get a message from the manager, just verbally through a staff member who sees them in the corridor, and says, oh, by the way, you can't have that. He says you can't have that time off. Tomorrow's going to be hectic. uh don't shoot the messenger. So it kind of just a passing moment happens, which kind of is world changing for that character, because depending on the audience how they dig into it, you find out that it's really quite a serious medical appointment. They've not been open about that with their work colleagues, who think it's not necessarily that serious, but actually it's really very serious for the child. It's the very, very sick child. And as a mother, as a parent, there's just no way she could conceivably not go to that, and yet the manager just cancelled the time off. So this is also, of course, not a shocking. It's shocking, and at the same time, it happens all the time. We know it happens all the time. But we built up a relationship with this character. We didn't expect them to suddenly be thrown into a situation, and then they were, and then we had to use our skills, if you like, to try and find a way to help them, to help that moment not lead to an explosion. And sometimes the audience managed to salvage it and bring people round to some kind of place of mutual respect and forward movement, and sometimes they didn't. I can't remember why I went into that, except that it's one of the most interesting bits of the experience. But yeah, it's yeah.
Right. Yes, you also put quite a few people through this program, right? So that it was not just one show, it was one show after the other, basically, right?
Yeah, so it's 30 participants, 480 people. So 30, about 17 shows over about 2.5 weeks. Yeah. So a really unusual project. I mean, like, but if we can persuade more companies to spend those kind of budgets. I mean, the actual per head cost wasn't huge, because nearly 500 people. It wasn't a huge per head cost. I mean, not significant enough, but not unusual, really.
Okay. Now, this would be the time normally where we would go into breakouts, but we don't have that much time. And I think we're a reasonably small group here. I would just like to give you a bit of a challenge. And let's play Francis and Donnacadh. And some of you come from the learning field, some of you from the immersive field. Let's see what we can do. First question is, does somebody have a challenge, something that people would need to learn? You can talk about your learners. It could be leadership, as in the example of Donnacadh. It could be negotiation. What would you like learners to learn? Let's start from the learning side. You can put it in the chat. You can open your mic. You can talk about maybe a learner you have right now. It could be anything. It could be learning a language. Could be anything. First idea is taken. That's pressure. Conflict management, public speaking. Okay, so the first idea, I said the first idea is taken. So public speaking we had from B. So that's the idea. So public speaking. Now, the second part of the challenge is to come up with a set, to come up with I'm really simplifying your work, Donnacadh, there, but come up with a set. Would it be, well, we had a couple of examples in Francis and Donnacadh's presentations. Could it be an apartment takeover? Could it be a peep show? Could it be the Docklands in the 1930s? Could it be Versailles? Could it be anything theatrical or anything that would be so an auction? Wonderful. Thank you very much for the idea, Ollie. An auction. So we have public speaking and we have an auction. So let's add a couple of theatrical elements to this, to the auction. What does an auction take? And what do we need in terms of actors? What do you think, Francis, Donnacadh? What do we need for an auction? What kind of props, what kind of actors, what kind of atmosphere do we need to create?
Maybe like maybe the owner of the auction house, perhaps.
Yeah.
The setting of the auction house depends on the era. Is it a little contemporary, so we're in something maybe a little more modern? Or, are we talking 80, 100, 200 years ago, in which case we're definitely looking a little more period?
The hammer. Yes, the hammer, says Ollie. Mallet. Yes, absolutely. The bidding paddles. Okay. And you need, of course, objects, right? So you need antiquities or whatever it is you want to auction, right? Can we make it a little bit more original? What would people want to sell? Animals for fun. Okay.
Maybe sorry, can I jump in with an idea? Just maybe we could be bidding for concepts or qualities, like wellness, or I don't know, openness, for example. And we instead of paying with money, we would have to pay with an argument of some kind, or some kind of argument or rationale or pitch of some kind,
Some kind of debate.
It's very nice. I wrote like we're selling skill, so maybe we can actually win a skill by debating. I like that.
Ooh. And Ollie says the currency of convincing. Beautiful. We're getting someplace here. What a creative audience this is. Wonderful. Um, Bidding for power says. What do you mean by bidding for power, Liza? Oops, you're on mute.
I just think that's the currency, isn't it? That's the thing everybody wants. So
Yeah.
like bidding for power, bidding for confidence, like, obviously you have to give something to get that back, but are you gonna be underhand about it? Are you gonna be sneaky about it? Are you gonna be honest and upfront about it?
Yeah. Maybe some people have issues with power, but Abby said influence is very similar, but it's not exactly the same thing. So yeah, influence.
You could also bid with kind of how much you're willing to, how much time, energy, effort you're willing to put into like, yeah, what are you going to give? What are you going to give back? If we give you influence, how are you going to kind of meet it halfway with your own energy and intellect, if you like.
Wow. Yeah. Wonderful. Now, who's going to be the auctioneer then? Is that going to be an actor or is it going to be a learner?
It's a very high focus role, isn't it? The auctioneer. It's very high focus, right? So for one person in the group to get that role is a lot of pressure on that person,
Maybe they could take turns.
Yeah, they could take turns, yeah.
Everyone could go.
Yeah.
To soften the pressure, it could be that there's an actor that plays the role but somehow gets sick.
Yeah.
And somebody has to step in. So it's clear that the person is stepping in so that pressure is kind of taken off of the person who's going to say, oh, I'll do it. But there, maybe we start everything off with the actor or actress, and then it's handed off to the participants.
Exactly. They lose their voice.
Yeah.
Wow.
And so then they need help from someone, a brave someone or someone's, to stand in for them.
Someone just play the hammer. Okay. Wonderful. Yes. Yeah. Okay. Good. People represent qualities or arguments that are being auctioned. Wonderful. We're getting someplace. This is really, really interesting. So, how many just in terms of...
Sorry, I just want to say I'm using this. I have a company who will buy this hobby tomorrow. It's great.
Yeah. Okay. So we all need a cut, right? So just make a note of all the names of the people who are on the call.
Yeah.
Especially the people who contributed in the chat.
Roll in there. Roll in there.
Okay, fantastic. Yes. Now, how many brains like this does it take to get a new show on the road, Francis Donnacadh?
How many brains? You mean how many people on the creative side?
Yes. Yes. I mean, we're a group of 10, 12 here in this room. 15. And quite a few people contributed. That's fun.
Mm-hmm.
But how many people are on a creative team in your projects, or are you on your own?
For me, it depends. Yeah. It depends on the project, the scope, the needs. Often me, or me with one or two people, depends on how many writers. I mean, I've been in writer room situations where we're 5 or 6, sometimes 9. And sometimes it's just me coming out with my brain and putting it out there. And then all the different roles come in later, creative producers, and everyone else, scenographers, and everyone else will come in.
Yeah, I think I would say a small number. It's useful to have a small core number. I would, in my experience. So with something like so one of the things I'm doing at the moment is I'm a creative director, a narrative designer on an indoor Peppa Pig themed kind of attraction, if you like. So I do a range of things, and on that one, obviously that has a huge team of people because there's the client, there's Hasbro who own the license, there's the people who created Peppa Pig, there's the brand team, there's the people who work in the company that employed me as a freelancer. there, and then there's all the other people that are going to have to work on this kind of huge project. But in terms of when I worked on initially on the concept and the kind of the creative plan, the kind of master document as to like what I describe as what's going to happen, and then what's going to happen, and then what's going to happen. The kind of the what happens, the book, the script, or whatever you want to call it. That was me and my associate Fiona, who also worked with me on the Docs project. That was the two of us. It was mostly the two of us upstairs in my local cinema because we lived quite near each other at the time. And sometimes Katie, who's a writer, who was going to write the dialogue for it. Sometimes she would join us, and that's pretty much it. And then every now and again we would go and we would meet our employers, or the exec producer or the CEOs of that company, and every now and again we would meet the liaison from the brand side. And so we would get a bit bigger. We would become 6 or 8 people. But in terms of doing the really complex, difficult, interesting, nuanced work of figuring out what the thing is, I think for me, like 2, 3, 4 they're all good numbers. I think once you go above 5, I think it's actually much harder to do the really detailed stuff. But once you get above 10, it becomes way easier to do the large scale stuff. So if you're going to make big stuff, then you're going to have to get the numbers keep increasing. I think on the Docs project it was similar. There was me and Fiona and a writer. So it was mostly either me on my, because that was a smaller scale project of Peppa Pig, so there's not as much money flying around to pay everybody. So a lot of that was me on my own, and then every now and again I would have Fiona and Che on the kind of working with me through the writing and development of it, and then there was a small but design team around that, and then a kind of a larger producerial team, but never huge numbers on that one.
Yeah, good. It's also interesting because our previous session of the Immersive Theatre of Learning, Abhinav was one of our invitees. We talked about frugal innovation, and we talked about small or no budget. And so today we had examples from Francis and Donnacadh of big budget and small budget. But we have a question from Elsie.
Yeah, sorry. This is all fascinating stuff. I think it's really interesting. I'm curious though, on the creative team, how important is authenticity in the experience? Because Francis, you talked about Marie Antoinette in the court, and then Donnacadh, you talked about the docs and all these elements. How important is it that the environment, what you create, is kind of authentic in the sense that it's linked to the theme?
Mm-hmm.
Does that mean?
So for me, authenticity is everything, and at the same time, that I was supposed to be here last month on the low budget. I've become very agile in designing with almost nothing and whipping it into something, and it's the devil for me. The devil is in the details.
Mm-hmm.
And so you put in the right details to create the container of authenticity, the container of your world. And that already, with the performances, if you have the actors, already that, and you immerse people and you allow them to step into that liminal space, they pass through, they go into your magic circle. But all of it is designed with just enough detail to give that authentic feeling that it's fine. It really does a lot of the heavy lifting. The more money you have, the more budget you can put in it. But for the WXO opening experience, it's Versailles. I had to recreate Versailles at an indoor attraction that's themed with platypuses and like Western world. Not at all Versailles. And so we went backstage. We found everything possible that could somehow render this world at all believable, and then we just concentrated in a small section. And again, it was the details, the rose spray as you walked in, the lavender petals, the candy, the violet candy, and that's it. Everything else kind of melted away, and you for a brief moment stepped into this world of Versailles, and then past the queen, then you were back into the world of Phantom Peak. So for me, the devil is in the details always. And then if you have more money, great, but really create it with your heart, with your authentic desire to build the space. And then that will add part of the immersion, allow people to join you there.
Mm-hmm. Wow, what a session. Thank you so much, Frances, Donnacadh. Thank you, everybody, for coming. So this is the end of this episode. There will be another episode in July. Not sure when, so watch out for the announcements on LinkedIn. And before I let you go, think about your own work. I'm doing the James Warman thing here now. Think about your own work and how you could apply some of these things tomorrow, next week. Maybe bring in some props into your world. Maybe try to find a way to get people out of their usual role into another world, into a new world. What are some of the ideas that you could put into practice almost immediately? Me personally, I'm thinking about renting apartments now, so that's a great idea.
Also, Bernd, maybe switching roles, like maybe give the HR to somebody else, so the accountant the HR and stuff like that. I think that would give
Good.
also an insight.
Yeah, wonderful. Yeah, great stuff. Thank you very much. Have a wonderful day, wonderful evening, everyone. Thanks so much for coming, and stay in touch, and we'll see each other soon.